with people. You should go into nursing. This is a case of where you take the process and you make it the outcome. In other words, they're saying, you're good at this process, why not make that what you want to do? And if you want to do it, it works great. NLP has a different idea, which is that why don't you really go for what you want and vary your process until you find one that helps you get where you want to go. And that could be here, that could be an NLP process where you're adding a resource to get your goal. It could be the new behavior generator where you see somebody else and therefore you learn how to do the goal. Every NLP technique is a strategy. I'll repeat that. Every NLP technique is a strategy. The add a resource is a strategy for how to get emotions from one part of your experience to another. The circle of excellence is how to get positive emotions of your past into your future. The new behavior generator is how to take somebody else's neurology, somebody else's ability to move, and instead of holding it dissociated, it's a strategy of how to associate into it. The fast phobia process is a strategy of how to get out of a negative feeling and make it so you can't get back in. That the visual integration is a strategy for dealing with conflicting outcomes. That the 6-step reframing is a strategy for getting out of behavior and into criteria so that your creative part can offer you new ways to still get all that criteria met. Each of them is a specific kind of strategy. And they're just the ones we've discovered so far. Now, this also happens in the real world. For example, years ago they were doing a series of drug trials. As I said, I did this modeling in the area of physician decision making. And the drug trials, when a drug trial, what you do is the physician has signed up with the pharmaceutical firm, and they're giving what they know to be an experimental drug, and the patient knows that it's an experimental drug, and so they report back every week or month or whatever, and they fill out forms, and they send them back to the company. It's a drug trial. So they were testing this new drug it reduces hypertension. So relaxing the heart, calmness, lower blood pressure, and it was a tablet. Take the tablet. And the guys were taking this, and they'd come back, and if you doctor, I got more hair. And the doctors would carefully write this down, yes. And he'd come back and they'd go, doctor, I got more hair. And they wrote carefully. 6 weeks later, the drug trials are canceled. And a couple of years later, a topical ointment is released on the market for growing hair. This is where you've taken the process and made it the outcome. Now, there's a number of men and women walking around. They've got more hair. And they've got lower blood pressure too. Because the drug don't know. It still has all of its effects. Yeah? So we can be more specific than that in NLP. We can find out more specifically what processes, what effects we want them to have. We can hold our outcomes constant and vary our behaviors until we find behaviors that are getting us our outcome. That's where the phrase, if what you're doing isn't working, do something else. By the way, when I was going through training, it was, do something else. And then there was, if you can, you can't. If you can't, you must. In other words, the idea was to put as many different kinds of flexibility there as you could, having a number of ways. Because if you only have one way to do something, you're a robot, and if you only have 2 ways, dilemma, right? You want to have multiple ways to do things. Grinder's strategy on this in terms of what we call tape editing, again, I offered this as we're towards the end of the program, is that he would do a session with someone, and after the session, didn't matter whether it was a personal consult, a athletic coaching, a business consultation, whatever, was, after the client left, was to replay the session in his mind with at least, and he said 5 different ways he could have done that same session. So run another scenario of the session. The session happened one way. What could have happened differently? run that scenario, and then, like the new behavior generator, step into that scenario and live it on the inside. You want to activate the neurology. Remember, you want to activate the mirror neurons. So it's as if you had that session and this one. Then, run another scenario, a different way you could have done it. If you think about that and you have 5 and 5 and 5 and 5, you begin to build massive capacity to do things in different ways. And we want to make sure you have ways that work. So we start out with a series of ways we know that work. We say, in step 1, find a resourceful state. We know that we can help you build a resourceful state in the future if you know how to do those things. And we also know there are many other ways to do the stuff than we've taught so far. Remember, it's the beginning of an opening funnel, beginning of possibilities. So, what I'm wondering is, how many of you got far enough in what you were doing that you would be ready to offer an intervention? Right? Because see, here's the top is the outcome, right? What's this? That's the strategy, right? So the strategy is the whole thing, and you can look at it this way. That if in your case you found for a single outcome intervention, you could say, all right, we now know what the person wants, what's going to help them get there? Operation. You might notice there's a color coding here now. That a different response, in other words, put a different operation, a circle of excellence. That would be the series of steps on how to create this outcome that they feel confident to go get what they want. Add a resource, change personal history. Or you could add a different skill behavior. You could future pace. You could have them imagine, see that other person with that skill, see themselves with that skill, associate that, get the skill that way. Or it might be that you want to reduce some current response to free them up to be more resourceful in the situation. In each case, we're looking at something that you're plugging into a how. The huge, and it's almost hard to imagine now because of the time that's passed, that when NLP was starting, most, not all, most psychotherapy was either about talking about how you felt about it, talking values clarification, or it was like pigeon training. It was like, well, we'll just train the behavior. This whole idea of dealing with cognition, the whole idea of dealing what's between the ears and in the body, the visual, the auditory, the kinesthetic, which seems so commonplace now, it wasn't. The idea that you can simply offer the person a new way to do things. As I said the other day, somebody says, well, I want to do this. I says, well, do it. And they go, I don't know how. Here are some specific ways that we know how to make it possible to do that rapidly. And that's just the beginning. So, how many people, I say, well, I wonder, I was looking at the groups, you got like 2 or 3 people that you actually had be on the hot seat, shall we say. And you got a well-formed outcome, yes? All right. So what I'd like to have you do is to break down into smaller teams around the person that got the well-formed outcome. And I would like the people in that team, and I imagine it's probably 2 to a group, I'd like those teams to strategize about what intervention is either going to get them to the outcome or is going to set them on the path to the outcome. You understand, there might have been a big outcome they wanted, in which case you want to take a smaller piece of it. And you go, okay, so what state, what understanding, what new behavior would allow them to begin to really get moving with that? Or perhaps you can take the whole enchilada and you can go, okay, they want to feel differently in this situation. They want to have this new skill in this situation. So you know what that is. Strategize about the outcome here, the intervention. And then I want you to come over to myself, to Chris, one of our other able coaches, and check it with us. Not that it needs it, but there's an old thing from my days when I was in the cabinet making and carpentry business I always liked, which was measure twice, cut once. Right? So you've measured in terms of the outcome, you're going to measure for the intervention, and then you have somebody else eyeball it, take a look at it and go, Yeah, that looks good. Or maybe you want to try this, a little variation. Or have you considered this? Another possibility. When you get that, then you go and do the intervention. All right? An organized piece of work here. To outcome, to formulation of the intervention, do the intervention. Yes?
So you want each team in the group to do an intervention on the same person?
Right, yes. So one person in a sense is getting all the attention, right? Because they were the ones that were willing to sit in the seat and talk about their outcome. Yeah, as if they're getting all the learnings. Over here, our partners, the people who are helping them, our guide and the meta person, you're getting a chance to think neurolinguistically. You say, given a certain outcome, what kind of intervention corresponds? And then you come to us, and we'll go, that's a really good choice. I like that. Or I say, well, wait a minute. Have you considered doing it this other way? And you go, you mean I can do that either way? It's like, yeah. There's a number of ways to do these things. And then you decide which one would be most interesting for you to do now, which one would stretch you, which one would deliver the most hoo-ha, technical term, to your identified patient, client, and do the intervention. Okay? All right, let's go to it. Comments, questions, observations, reactions?
Cool stuff.
Cool stuff. Yes, it is cool stuff. That's for sure. And you're cool stuff for doing it because none of this exists without people. Right. And to be really clear, this is not a strategy. This is a mulched up tree that's then been rolled out into long little pieces, covered with colored dye that I'm sure is from oil, dead dinosaurs, and that we make the meaning of it. And that, as I want to say in these kinds of trainings, is that words do not change people, experience does. And that what you've been learning, and what you're learning more and more about, is how to systematically organize your experience in order to help someone else systematically organize theirs. As John Grinder would say, we change the world through changing ourselves. Each of you in your own way, whether as the person who was the explorer or as the guide or as the person who assisted in the meta position, have been learning to systematically organize your experience so that when you go back to your situations in life, your organization is different. That of its very nature is going to force being a wrong word perhaps, but it's going to necessitate that the other people act differently. Now I'll tell you right now, one of the ways they're going to act differently is they're going to get more insistent that you should be yourself. The old Ken, the old Yvonne, the old Amal that you used to be, instead of this new person I really don't know now. So my suggestion to you is that when you go back, you fake it for the first few moments. You know, you act like who you were before, and then you go, "Wah-ha-ha!" You know.
That's about what it's going to be like, too. Right?
Well, it can be like that, and it also can be the case where you show, by the way you move through the world, that instead of being upset in a situation, you get curious about what you could learn, what you could do differently. That when something is around you and you don't know what to do, they see you do something, and you start to generate new options and ideas, and they say, how did you do that? Well, if you pay me a lot of money, I'll show you. No, that's an approach. And it can also be the approach that you share. That you say, come on in, the water's fine. I, again, will go to experiences I've had at this point where I've seen people take this stuff and go back and use it to divide a relationship. Well, you don't know about meta outcomes, so I can't hang out with you anymore. I'm going to go hang out with my friends because they know what a 6-step reframe is. This is not a useful use of this material. Rather, the jargon was a way of allowing you to rapidly notice certain things you wouldn't have noticed. By calling it eye-accessing cues, you could see people's eyes going somewhere and go, oh, well, visualization. or by calling something criteria or normalizations. We use that to identify those so you could more quickly learn the skills.